Good afternoon. It's great to see you all. We will start with a statement from the Secretary General, and then we will take your questions.
Good afternoon and welcome to the presidential complex here in Ankara, in Turkey, for the 2026 NATO summit. First of all, let me thank President Erdogan and his team for hosting us at this fantastic venue. We are meeting here in Ankara 1 year after NATO leaders gathered for our summit in The Hague, where allies made historic commitments. They agreed on the urgency of making our alliance stronger because of the dangerous world we face. They committed to invest 5% of GDP in defense by 2035. And now, just 1 year later, we already see transformational progress. Here in Ankara, I expect nations to present clear, concrete and credible plans to reach that 5% goal. And the evidence we see so far is impressive. Just 1 year into a 10-year project, we see that European allies and Canada are already investing around 4% of their GDP in defense and security. This includes major increases to allies' investments in core defense, as well as their defense and security-related investments. Last year, European allies and Canada spent nearly 20% more on core defense than they had the year before. Looking at 2025 and 2026 combined, that's $258 billion in extra investments. And the trend continues. We will need more forces, more resources and a much stronger industrial base. After years of underinvestment, we are producing real capabilities. European allies and Canada are now on a trajectory to equalize the defense spending with the United States. And not just that, they are taking on more leadership within NATO's command and control structure, stepping up on conventional defense, on efforts to bolster our deterrence and defense, including along the entire eastern flank in the Baltic region and the Arctic, and spearheading support to Ukraine. All of this is evidence of a real shift in mindset. A stronger Europe in a stronger NATO. The investment is there, and now we need to ensure that we are translating our economic might into military capabilities, putting the cash to work, from defense plans to drones, from money to missiles and interceptors. This means ensuring innovation is front and center, overcoming fragmented national defense industries and cutting red tape. The NATO Summit Defense Industry Forum, which we'll host tomorrow, will be the platform where we showcase how we are working with industry to deliver the capabilities that credible deterrence and defense demand. We will announce tens of billions in new contracts that will provide the crucial kit we need to deter and defend. And then our industries, from Arkansas to Ankara, combine their strengths and step up supply. The result is not only improved security. This will help grow our economies, spread innovation, and support hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. So we are investing in our own security, ensuring we have what we need to safeguard our societies today and tomorrow. Because the threats we face are real, including from Russia, which continues to wage war on Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine is changing the dynamics on the battlefield, thanks to the bravery, the dedication and ingenuity of their armed forces. But they need our continued support, especially when it comes to air defense. Russia continues drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, with another horrific attack just last night. So as Ukraine continues to defend its sovereignty, allies and NATO partners must continue to ensure Ukraine gets what it needs. And let me be clear, all allies need to pull their weight. so that our support to Ukraine continues to flow. Because Ukraine's security is so closely linked with our own. So that's the overview of our agenda for the summit here in Ankara. We are delivering on the commitments made in The Hague to invest in our defense. We will ensure that we are rebalancing for the better, fairly sharing the responsibility for our shared security. We will turn cash into capabilities, joining forces with industry. And we will continue our robust support for Ukraine, reminding President Putin that we are firm in our commitment. Over the next 2 days, the 32 allies, along with partners from Ukraine, the European Union, the Indo-Pacific and the Gulf, will gather to ensure that NATO continues to deliver. Together, we represent nearly 2/3 of the world economy. And we are coming together because we know that cooperation is key. We are stronger together, in NATO, with partners, to ensure the freedom and security we all hold dear. Thank you.
All right, and now we'll head to questions. We'll start over here, 5th row towards the end.
Thank you very much. Secretary General Nick Robertson from CNN.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the questions. Sir, since the Hague summit, President Trump has very heavily hinted that he'd like to annex Greenland, has very heavily chastised NATO allies for not being on the front line enough in Afghanistan, and Iraq has been upset that NATO allies have not stepped up and provided the support that he was hoping for around Epic Fury, the United States and Iran war. What sort of tone is this summit going to have, and how hard is it in the light of that to project this consistent tone of unity and strength, the message that you just say is core?
Well, let me say that I had a good visit last week with President Trump, and we discussed the staggering increase in defense spending by Europeans and Canadians. And of course, this is because of Putin and Russia and Ukraine, but also because he, President Trump, has been extremely forceful, encouraging us to do this. And you could argue that he is the first president of the US since Eisenhower who was able to come to this situation where the Europeans and the Canadians will spend the same as the Americans. This equalization was a wish for 50, 60 years, and now it's happening, and I think in large part to his leadership. And we also discussed some of the disappointment he has, for example, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz or Iran more generally, and we also discussed almost 5,000 sorties of planes taking off from European bases in support of Epic Fury. And only last Friday we have seen the French and the Brits coming together with the Omani to make sure that collectively they will defend the principle of the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, which is an extremely important development only in the last 72 hours.
Okay, staying over here, 7th row, the man in the T-shirt.
Mr. Secretary General.
Where are you? I need to see you. Yes, hi. Yeah. Good to see you.
My name is Volodymyr Brunets. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine, ICTV. Obviously, this summit is happening just across the Black Sea from Putin's war against Ukraine. And yes, we have seen clearly what happened last night was obviously a clear message to NATO. Have the leaders discussed that message? Have they heard it? And what will they say in response?
Well, I think what the message last night again was of how desperate Putin is. Because you guys, the Ukrainians, are doing well on the battlefield. When you look, and of course this is terrible news for all the Russian families involved. Putin is willing to accept that up to 35,000 of his own, primarily men, in uniform are getting killed on the battlefield. Which is terrible news for the families. But of course, from a military point of perspective, important for Ukraine. You are successful there. You are hitting the Russian economy. You are hitting deep into Russia when it comes to energy infrastructure, when it comes to crucial defense industrial capacity of Russia. And you are able on the front line to prevent the Russians from making big advances like like a couple of months ago, where at least they made some progress on the front line. They are not doing that anymore. It is now more or less of a stalemate. So what happened last night is an indiscriminate attack on innocent civilians, on infrastructure, cities in Ukraine, people getting killed. But this is not the way Russia can ever win this war. Of course, it is terrible for the people involved, and my thoughts and prayers are with them and the people in Kiev and other cities who have to go through this. But the fact is that you guys are doing so much better over the last couple of months than only 3 or 4 months ago.
Okay, let's come to this side of the room. The fifth row woman in the brown t-shirt.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Deborah Haynes from Sky News. The UK Ministry of Defence today has revealed that a Russian spy plane has been sort of flying over the aircraft carrier that's the NATO flagship at the moment in the high north, dropping large numbers of these sonar devices that it's believed was more to harass the warship. What's your response to this act by Russia? And do you think that the fact that Russia feels confident enough to harass a NATO warship on the eve, just ahead, a few days before the NATO summit, we've had these drone sightings across, sites across Europe, lots of other sort of sub-threshold activities. Are you worried that it means that NATO is failing to deter Russia under the threshold of conventional war, despite all of this strong language about increasing defences?
To the contrary, and your country, the United Kingdom, did exactly what needed to be done. And let me commend the British military for the actions they took. That's part one of my reaction to your question. Part two is that it also shows the unprofessionalism of the Russians. Willing to do this so close to this ship, of course that's reckless, it's unprofessional, and again, the UK armed forces did exactly what they needed to do, and this is evidence that we will defend ourselves.
All right, and then just behind her in the sixth row.
Thank you. Secretary General
Hi.
Latika Berg from the Nightly Australian. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Overnight, China has confirmed that it has tested a missile in the South Pacific. The IP4 plan to raise this here at NATO. How will you discuss this? And given the seriousness of this, is it a concern to you that for the second year in a row, you are struggling to get IP4 leaders attend this summit?
On the second part of your question, no, because we have a very close cooperation with the IP4, including with Anthony, your Prime Minister, and the Prime Ministers and Presidents of New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. I was just texting this afternoon with the Japanese Defense Minister about this latest development, and I think it is evidence of the fact that we cannot be naive about China. You know this, and this is why we have this close cooperation. Because these theaters are getting more and more intertwined, connected. What happens in the Pacific is relevant to what is happening in the transatlantic. And we see it also in the war with Ukraine, where China, North Korea and Iran are key enablers of Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. So this again is evidence that we cannot be naive, and I can assure you that we are on it.
Okay, coming over here, fourth row, AP.
Lorne Cook from the Associated Press. You mentioned in your opening remarks clear, credible, concise plans that the Allies have to come up with. What if they don't, is the obvious question. The US envoy has spoken of something in store, if that's not the case. And then more generally, if we look at this stronger Europe in NATO, how does NATO actually accommodate that? How do you give them more planning responsibilities, more command? How do you simplify the political decision-making that is really difficult to do?
I don't think so, and that's to your second part of your question. That's already happening. You see Europeans taking over commands in NATO when it comes to the real war fighting, and the Americans will then make sure that when it comes to land, air and sea commands, they will take care of those. So there is already a clear distinction of labor where the Europeans are stepping up. We see the same when it comes to Ukraine. The US still providing crucial kit into Ukraine, defense industrial output like interceptors, but paid for by the Europeans and Canada. And we see it on so many other fronts. When you look at the mass of people in the forward land forces, when it comes to Baltic sentry, Eastern sentry, Arctic sentry, it is the Europeans and the Canadians providing the mass of the men and women in uniform there. So that's Europe and Canada stepping up. So that's already happening, and the present structures accommodate for that. And when it comes to your first part of your question, the good news is with the 250 billion extra spent in 25 and 26, can you imagine? $215 billion by the Canadians and the Europeans. That means that we have reached the max in terms of absorption capacity. Why? Because there is a limit to what you can spend extra in 1 or 2 years in terms of recruiting the men and women in uniform, making sure that the defense industrial base, which is rapidly developing and turning out more output, but still, of course, there is a limit to what they can do in pumping up the output in 1 or 2 years. So I think we are in really good shape. And massively the Europeans are stepping up. Look at countries like Germany and so many others. And of course, if 1 or 2 still have to be convinced, we have ways to do that.
All right, we're going to come here in the third row, and I'll ask the mic to first come to the man in the black T-shirt and then the woman next to him. So if you could just wait there. Thank you.
Ah, he's Dutch. Watch and learn.
Yeah, I don't think I have to introduce myself, but I will do it anyway. Dutch agency ANP, thanks, sir. You extensively praised the host nation, but we've seen in the past few days, weeks, a crackdown again on dissidents, on even journalists, a comedian. Is Ankara still the best place to have a summit of liberal democracies? And do you think it's a good occasion for leaders to address these issues with President Erdogan?
Let me say this. When it comes to democracy, democracy is more than elections. Elections, of course, are crucial in democracy, but democracy is also the free media, you in this room. That you can ask all the questions you want and write the pieces you want and do your research, etc. And of course, democracy is also for people to be able to organize demonstrations if they so choose. So it's much more than only free elections. And when it comes to the media, it is very important for NATO that media can attend major events in person.
Okay, and then the woman here.
Pırıl Cennet Milliyet.
Where are you?
Here.
Just next to you.
Yes, hi,
Yeah.
sorry.
Pırıl Cennet Milliyet. Secretary General, how important is Turkey to NATO's future security strategy?
Very important. Of course, you were there almost since the beginning, since 1952, so a couple of years after the start, Turkey joined NATO. You have one of the biggest armed forces in NATO, well trained. And particularly the last 5 to 10 years, you have rapidly developed your defense industrial base. You have now about 3,000 companies every day churning out the kit, the defense industrial output our men and women in uniform need to defend ourselves. So for all these reasons, Ankara, Istanbul, Turkey as a whole is really important. And your place on the map is important, your leadership in NATO is important, and the fact that you organized this summit, now this NATO summit here in Ankara, is evidence of that.
Okay, we're going to come back to this side of the room. We're going to start in the second row. The man in the suit with the glasses. Maybe come to the front row. I think that'll be easier if you get it from there.
There are more than one man in his glasses.
This is true, but in the second row, in a suit with a tie.
And a tie, you're right. This is enough detail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Robert Pitsukala, European Romania. Mr. Secretary General, this summit is taking place amid renewed calls from the US side for European allies to assume greater responsibility for NATO's defense, while the US reviews its military posture in Europe. How confident are you that this burden-shifting model will strengthen, not weaken, the US commitment to European security, and what message does this send to both Ukraine as a partner and Russia as a threat? And also, if I may, because colleagues mentioned threats from Russia, drones have been and continue to be a threat. We've seen this in the eastern flank from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Will this be addressed in the summit and also at the NATO Industry Forum, and how it will be addressed? Thank you.
Absolutely, you will see tomorrow that we will talk about drones. No doubt leaders will bring this issue up on Wednesday, when we have the leaders meeting, but also tomorrow in the industry event, you will see drones front and center in many discussions. It's crucial. When it comes to your first part of your question, let me first of all say the changes to the NATO force model, and again, this is a planning tool. So it means that nations declare what they will provide to the collective if SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander, needs it. And what the US has done, and I think this was important, is assessed again what they can provide to NATO in case of a two-theater conflict. Let's say a conflict in the Indo-Pacific and in the Euro-Atlantic. And as General Krenkovic, the Supreme Allied Commander, has already stated, it makes us stronger that we know what we can count on. It's not a massive drawdown in terms of what they will provide, but we now know much more exactly what the Americans can provide, and already the Europeans are backfilling. But there's more to this question than only this discussion about the NATO force model. What you are seeing is a NATO which indeed is changing in a transformational sense. I would argue that the NATO as we had only 3, 4, 5 years ago was not sustainable. It is not sustainable that we ask a country with 350 million people living 8 hours flying from here to defend against the Russians, with 600 million people living in this part of NATO territory, the richest part of the world, being so overly dependent on the United States. So rebalancing that, the United States still providing the nuclear umbrella, the United States still providing a crucial conventional support to NATO as a whole, and therefore to the transatlantic security, and therefore, of course, also to their own security. For example, preventing nuclear submarines from Russia ending up on US shores. But generally speaking, rebalancing that is crucial, and therefore a stronger European role, Canada also stepping up, is important, because otherwise the alliance, to be honest, would long-term probably not have been sustainable. We are now creating an alliance which is sustainable, where the US knows it is a fair deal. We are spending the same as they are, taking more responsibility for the conventional defense of Europe, stronger NATO. Yes.
All right, we're going to take 2 more on this side and then come back to this side. So here in the 3rd row towards the center.
We know him.
Secretary General, nice to see you. Steve Sedgwick from CNBC. So I
Hello.
admire your optimism, which has followed through since the groundbreaking achievements in The Hague. But if we were in such a good place, why would Pete Hegseth be accusing allies of freeloading, of free-riding, having a review which is holding the sword of Damocles over you and NATO about which parties will pass, which will fail? You talked about the European money which is being spent, and yet he's dividing nations, saying you get support, you won't get support if you don't spend enough as well. The US is splitting NATO, isn't it, rather than bringing it together?
It is not. It is, I think, bringing NATO closer together, and having a review regularly, I think, is only wise. And the way it will be organized, with the Supreme Allied Commander being center stage in the review, the fact that the Americans have declared very clearly that they will do this in close coordination with all allies, I think is absolutely important. And as we have seen previously with the NATO force model, of course, these adjustments are different from the review. These are different tracks and different processes. But also there they have done this in close coordination and consultation. So no worries there.
Okay, the row behind him, the woman towards the center.
Both. No.
There are many. The mic is coming.
Thank you, Secretary General. Charlie Hancock, Moscow Times, independent Russian media and exile in the Netherlands. Hi.
Hi.
Lithuania and Finland just lifted their prohibitions on hosting nuclear weapons on their territories. Does that make us safer? And what can you tell us about the future for nuclear weapons within NATO?
Well, these, of course, are decisions by countries to lift these restrictions they had in the past. What we know is, when it comes to the nuclear umbrella, crucial here is, of course, the United States. It's the US nuclear umbrella is the ultimate guarantor of our freedom and security in the whole of NATO, of course, particularly also when it comes to the European part of NATO territory. But we also have the British and the French nuclear capabilities, where the French are a little bit outside the NATO structures, but of course very much there, and the Brits coordinating within the NATO structures, and this is because of political decisions made many years ago. But as you know, the French have recently announced how they want to make sure that their nuclear deterrence will have even a bigger impact when it comes on the overall deterrence of the alliance, in close coordination and consultation with the Americans. So I think when it comes to the nuclear, we are really in a good place. And you saw this in a nuclear planning group meeting we had with the defense ministers now 4 weeks ago, which was very successful and led to clear outcomes. So individual decisions by Finland and Lithuania, generally speaking, we are in a good place.
Coming over to this side, we're going to the 7th row. I see Bloomberg about 6 or 7 seats in.
Who is Bloomberg?
Thank you, Secretary General. Andrea Policiano from Bloomberg.
Hi.
You mentioned the attacks on Ukraine yesterday night. What they have shown is that there's a very severe lack of interceptors. Does it mean that the Pearl program is not delivering? What can we expect from the summit? Can we expect Ukraine to go home with promises for more interceptors, deliveries, maybe some licensing agreements? Thank you.
When it comes to the political, I can assure you that the United States is doing everything they can to deliver on the Pearl commitment, and they are doing. So even as we speak, Pearl deliveries, including interceptors, are being sent to Ukraine and being used by Ukraine. From a practical perspective, as already enclosed in your question, there is a limit to the amount of interceptors there are in NATO territory, and that's why we need to make sure that we produce more. That's one of the reasons why Ukraine itself has been working. Of course, this is not something which will lead to results immediately, but to see what they can do with help of NATO partners, allies, to produce more when it comes to interceptors. So we are working from every angle, from everybody is involved in this. But when it comes to Pearl in the United States, I can only commend them for what they are doing in terms of making sure that flow continues.
All right, we're going to come down here to the 3rd row now. Third one in. Wait for the mic, please. She'll come.
Don't fight.
Mr. Secretary General, Gökhan Çelikay from Anadolu Agency. And I want to ask that we know that NATO supports both defense spending and production. Considering Turkey's achievements in the defense industry, what kind of role can Ankara play in enhancing the alliance's overall defense capacity? And you visited also Aselsan. What are your thoughts? What advice would you give to the NATO allies, particularly regarding how NATO can benefit from Turkish defense industry? Thank you so much.
Well, let me start by saying that NATO is already very much profiting from what Turkey is doing in terms of the defense industrial output. And Aselsan is one example, but only one of maybe 3,000 companies in total, big ones like Aselsan, but also medium-sized, smaller companies. And second part of my reply would be that Turkey is already, through its defense industry, supporting so many other countries. You are working across the alliance. You had a successful visit of a Belgian trade mission here. You had the Polish president visiting only last week. And I know that you are working closely with so many other countries in NATO, within the EU and outside EU, Europe, but also with the US. There are investments by Turkish industrial companies in the industrial base in the United States. So this is really important. And this is why we need an alliance where we have the least amount of barriers possible in terms of working together across the alliance, from, as I said, from Arkansas to Ankara. So from the United States up to and including this beautiful city.
All right, here in the 4th row, 5th seat in.
Hello.
I am Emre Karaca from Habertürk TV, from Turkish TV channel. Maybe you mentioned that all part of my question, but I'd like to underline specifically actually.
What is the NATO's position regarding unity and solidarity among all allies? Actually, in different times, Turkish authorities have acknowledged, complained that some NATO members impose sanctions on Turkey. And do you agree that hidden sanctions have been implemented by some NATO members to other NATO members, actually, specifically, of course, Turkey? And do you agree with that, the argument that actually European Union countries, discrepancy between European Union countries of members and others, of course? Would you like to say your position, your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And obviously, from my position and role, it is important that all 32 allies work together, again, as boundarless as possible, without any barriers when it comes to, for example, sharing defense industrial output, and making sure that we work across the alliance and across the Atlantic. Of course, in an alliance like NATO, you will always have your political discussions and sometimes disagreements. People are always getting overly excited when that happens. I don't. I think it is only incumbent on democratic alliances that you sometimes have those discussions. And then it is my role to discreetly, behind the scenes, see what I can do to help to solve it. So not to speak about it in public, so that I can be of maximum help behind. Some of these issues are there for many years, sometimes decennia, tens of years already. That's also unavoidable in a big alliance like NATO. But I can assure you, when you ask me what I think, I really believe that when it comes to EU, non-EU European countries, Canada, the United States, let's make sure that we work together to the max. Because in the end, we have only one goal, which is to protect the whole of NATO territory against Russia, against terrorism, against any other threat we face. And that means that, internally we can have these discussions again, no problem, but then solve them and come together.
All right, we're coming back to this side of the room now. Let's start in the second row. The woman in white and then the man next to her.
Hello, I'm from the Insider Media. My name is Anastasia Mikhailova, and I want to ask you about peace negotiation. How we all know, the Putin stay on his conduction and never change how he wants to peace will be. But my question is, what could make change his mind? And what do you think about news from today about when he told to Ukraine not attack, only defend yourself? How it's all could be? Thank you.
Yeah, when it comes, a very good question. When it comes to the peace process, obviously you need two to tango. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is willing to sit down with Putin in whatever format to solve this terrible war. Obviously, so far, Putin has declined to sit down. And I really want, again, to thank the Americans for breaking the deadlock with Putin, particularly the American presidents from almost day one when he got into office, opening up channels to Putin. They think that's extremely important because he was the only one who could do that, and particularly at that stage of the process. The Ukrainians are doing better and better on the battlefield, but in the end, I cannot predict what needs to happen for Putin to come to the negotiating table. I think nobody in this room can predict. It's difficult to look into this guy's mind and head. But what we are seeing is an economy in difficulty, Ukrainians striking deep inside Russia, vital energy infrastructure and defense industrial infrastructure, and of course Ukraine doing better and better on the battlefield. And as I said, Putin is willing to sacrifice up to 35,000 of his own men, which is crazy on the battlefield. Can you imagine what an impact that has on all those families? So if you're a young guy living in Russia and you contemplate joining the war effort, well, think again, because probably you will be one of the 35,000 this month, next month, the month after. But hey, I don't know what we need to do more to get Putin to the table.
Okay, and the man just next to her.
Media outlet Zerkalo from Belarus. 2 weeks ago, President Zelensky said that Belarus is building and upgrading its military infrastructure, which Russia could use again to attack Ukraine from the north. Ukraine demanded that Belarus turn off the signal repeaters near the border that helps Russian drones attack the Ukrainian cities. Zelensky said that Belarus did it, but there are reports that Ukraine might have destroyed them with drone strikes. Does NATO have any information on whether Ukraine attacked Belarus to disable these repeaters? And does NATO share Ukraine's concern about the military build-up in Belarus?
Well, obviously, I cannot not tell you everything we, well, yes or not know, but because some of that is, of course, classified. But let me say that let's not be naive about the role Belarus is playing. I mean, they're under huge influence from Russia, from Moscow. So I think what happens in Minsk is very much inspired, to use that word, by Putin. And that's, I think, clearly coming from the statements of Zelensky.
All right, we're just about out of time. We'll try and take a couple more questions. Let's come here in the second row.
You're getting angry, no? you're too much in the center. Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. I am with 1+1 TV Ukraine, and I have a quick follow-up on Russia's escalation in Ukraine. President Zelensky offered co-production of PAC-3 missiles for Patriots. From your senses, is this goal achievable, and are you going to discuss this question?
Well, obviously, these are bilateral decisions by allies and partners to work together. My sense is that these discussions are ongoing, so nothing new to report here, but more generally speaking, of course, it's always good if allies and partners work together in a trustworthy way to see whatever you can do to collectively ramp up the production. And we know that also the United States has a problem with the defense industrial output. It's not only a problem in Europe, it's also a problem in the US. The American president is really beating the American defense industrial companies to produce more. And they committed to do so, the famous quadruple sessions he had in the White House. So if this can help, maybe it could, but in the end, these are bilateral decisions.
All right, we're going to go over here on the aisle towards the back. See Le Monde.
Thank you very much, Nicolas Boursier from the Daily Le Monde. Very short question. Will you find a solution for the S-400 bought in 2017 here by Turkey, here in Ankara?
Again, that is really a bilateral decision by, between allies.
All right. I think we're in the seventh row here. The man in the white shirt, yes.
Thank you, Alison, and it's Joe Barnes from the Daily Telegraph.
Hi.
Hello. You spoke about, and I can't remember your exact words, about ensuring that NATO allies can meet their spending goals and targets. Matthew Whitaker, the US ambassador to NATO, has been speaking about giving allies benefits for hitting the targets. Given how much you enjoy your trips to the Oval Office, do you believe it is in the right spirit that President Trump restricts those who don't hit NATO's defence spending goals to similar meetings? But more crucially, do you think the US should be restricting and maybe not prioritising countries for procurement of American weapon systems if they are not hitting that 5% goal? Thank you.
Hey, listen, in the end, it's up to every ally, including the United States, to decide how they build that relationship with the other 31. And so let me answer your question more generally. I think the US, and I use the word encouraging, and probably that is a bit of a weak word, strongly encouraging allies, indeed, to move to the 5%, to make sure that defense industrial output is ramping up. I think is only good. And then when it comes to the specific measures, in the end, that's up to each ally to decide how they will develop their bilateral relations with other allies. But generally speaking, it helps a lot that the American president is on this. As I said, it was because of Russia, it was because of Ukraine. But when you look at last year, countries like Spain and Italy and Belgium and Canada, so bigger economies, all reaching the 2%. Of course it was because of Russia and Ukraine. But maybe there was also, to a small part, the Trump factor. And I commend him for it, because he's the first one since Eisenhower who is delivering on this and making sure that where the US has always been committed to NATO, that this expectation the US had since Eisenhower, that we spend the same as they do, as the US is doing, we are getting there now.
All right. Thank you all so much. That's all we have time for this afternoon, but we will see you again, and we look forward to it. Enjoy your time here. Thanks so much.
Next time you sit on the side. Hey. Take care.